So, dear students, we are going to discuss today the chemical engineering design in a broader spect, that is also termed as your plant design. Now, in that plant design, which is a very broad terminology, the chemical equipment design or a process equipment design is one of the aspects where for chemical engineering design, one has to need of understanding of different general design procedures which are applicable to all branches of engineering. That is for chemical engineers, it's the chemicals and polymers, fuels, food industries, paper industries, paint industries, oil industries, pharmaceuticals, minerals and mining industries, then biochemical industries. Not only this chemical sector industries, but also other sectors of the industries, that is electronics, consumer goods, biomedicals, power generations, all these different industries they are in concern. Now, this creation of plans and specifications and the predictions of financial outcomes if the plant were implemented is the activity of chemical engineering design. So, this financial outcome or financial concern, that is the most important part where one is going to ready for the investment. So, designing is a creative activity, and this is the design that is with certain specific objective, keeping in the mind of the need of a customer. So this customer requirement or the customer needs certain products which can be consumed. So the need of a consumable product by a customer. So by developing and evaluating the possible designs arrives at the best way of achieving that objective. New chemical product it can be, or a production process, or a modification in the existing process. So three different things are there. One is a new chemical product, or the new modification production process, new method, new way of producing it, which is going to give you the less inputs, and the same existing process is there where we are going to have a certain modifications. Then when considering all the possible ways of achieving the objective, that is the customer need, the requirement of a customer that should be fulfilled. So when considering all these possible ways of achieving the objective, the designer will be with the certain constraints of different factors. What are certain limitations? किस दायरे में काम करने का है मेरे को, कितने लिमिटेशंस है मेरे को, उस लिमिटेशंस को कंसीडर करके ही मेरे को काम करने का है. It is not possible that you cannot create the geological situations, you cannot create the financial and government situations, all that exist, and with that constraint and with that limitations, one has to develop for his design. So this constraints on the possible solutions to a design problem arise in many ways. There can be some constraints which will be the fixed and invariable, such as those that arises from your physical laws, government regulations and standards and codes for the designing, then your location, all these are the fixed. So other that will be the less rigid. So there are fixed and invariables, and second type of constraint, they are less rigid constraints and can be relaxed by the designer as the part of general strategy for seeking the best design, बेस्ट आउटपुट चाहिए मेरे को, तो इसके साथ कॉम्प्रोमाइज करने का है, दैट इज I have to decide. That is, a engineer, design engineer has to decide with the discussion of the producer. The constraints that are outside the designer's influence can be termed as the external constraints. So there are internal constraints and external constraints. The constraints that are outside the designer's influence. The designer that is not going to change. There is no option for the designer to manipulate or adjust with that. So these are your external constraints, and those can be your physical laws, standard codes, then your government regulations. All these are your external constraints. But there are certain less rigid. So within the boundaries, there will be a number of possible designs bounded by the other constraints, and which can be termed as the internal constraints. Now this figure, the outside, there are the external constraints, and the inner one, the internal constraints. So the external constraints can be your safety regulations, then the resources, then the physical laws, then standards and codes, then government regulations, and economic constraints. All these are your external constraints. Now, which are the internal constraints? One has to walk inside these external constraints. There is no, I cannot change these external constraints. So that is bound to be there. You have to work in safety regulations. There is no option, you cannot avoid it. Then the economic constraints, इतने ही कोर्स में काम करने का है, no bigger budget than that. So again, it's a major constraint. You have to follow all rules and regulations of the government. There no outways. You can manipulate, but one has to work in those constraints only. Then standards and codes for designing, they are all to be followed. Then there are certain physical laws and certain limitations related to the resources are there. However, the internal constraints are there. That is, major is the choice of a process. Which process I am going to select, that is going to give me the certain options. There are different ways by which the one product that can be produced, and out of that I have to select that process. Then once the process that is selected, then I have to decide the process conditions. Before that, the materials of construction, depending on your process, choice of the process, materials, raw materials, material of construction. Then there are certain personal constraints are also there. Then the time constraints and the method constraints. So all these are your internal and external constraints. And with these internal and external constraints, one has to give the best possible solutions, best possible engineering design solutions. So again, these economic considerations or constraints and the time constraints, they will be there. Now the stages in the development of design the initial identification of the objective to the final design, that is the first is the determine the customer needs, there only the designing starts or requirement starts. This is the need. Then certain design specifications are there. Then the general design concept is there, which is to be build performance models, then predict certain fitness for services, whether it is suitable or not. If required, then R&D that is needed. Then general design concepts, one has to again think for the evaluation of economic aspects, then optimize that and select a proper design. Then once a proper design that is select, then detailed designing and the equipment selection that is to be done. Once the detailed designing and equipment selection is done, then the procurement of those equipments has to be done. Then after the procurement and installation, then the beginning of the operation that will be there. So this is the general design procedure for our chemical industries. So one by one we will see all these objectives in detail. So the design objective, that is the need, क्या मेरे को चाहिए, क्यों मेरे को चाहिए, that is what is my objective. In that objective there are the needs that should have and that must have. The two things are there. है मेरे को need, but it is must and it should. I must have a degree of chemical engineering, but I can compromise with the percentage of marks. That is, must is the chemical engineering degree, and the marks should have a better mark, should have the 80% marks, or nowadays you are getting 9 pointers. So it is this needed in that must have and should have. It is similar to our requirements. Desires तो बहुत होती है, but सारी desires fulfill नहीं हो सकती है. It is similar to that. Even if I want to give a certain product, but that product should have a certain must have and certain should have. The certain should have, there I can going to compromise. एक certain ऐसे modification चाहिए, एक specific requirement रख दिया मैंने, but वो requirement fulfill करने के लिए मेरे को बहुत सारा investment करना पड़ रहा है. Whether I should do that or not, it's a question. Basic product तो design कर दिया मैंने, mobile तो basically design कर दिया है. Mobile का purpose है, that is going to will be sufficient in 1000 rupees. Then I am going to enhance, increase its quality. Touch screen कर दिया, then a certain software, then certain processors. Now वो मोबाइल लेते वक्त अपन सोचते हैं कि कितना रैम होने चाहिए, कितना रोम होने चाहिए, कितना मेगापिक्सल का कैमरा होने चाहिए. तो इतनी मेरी मस्ट रिक्वायरमेंट है. वो मस्ट रिक्वायरमेंट depending on my financial constraints that is coming into the picture. तो उसमें से मेरे को कौन से कॉम्प्रोमाइज करने के हैं, 108 मेगापिक्सल का लेने का है या 48 मेगापिक्सल का लेने का है. There I am going to compromise. Whether I am going to use updated processor say that is required or the somewhat 1 year old processor that can be sufficient. I can again compromise with the 3 GB RAM and 8 GB RAM. So all these are my constraints. So that is the design objective क्या है और उसके लिए constraints में से कितने needed है, that is what is must have एंड कितने शुड हैव है. तो शुड हैव के लिए हाउ मच आई एम गोइंग टू पे इट एक्स्ट्रा, depending on that I am going to adjust with this should have. So all design starts with the perceived need, the demand, the objective. The need can be the public need for a certain product, creating a commercial opportunity as foreseen by the sales and marketing organization. Then before starting the work, the designer should obtain as complete and as unambiguous the statement of requirements as possible. So इतनी इतनी लिस्ट अपन बोलते मोबाइल खरीदने का है तो रैम रोम मेगापिक्सल कैमरा एंड प्रोसेसर ऑल दिस माय रिक्वायरमेंट पॉसिबल रिक्वायरमेंट्स. There we are specifying कि इतना चाहिए इतना चाहिए इतना चाहिए. That is what we must have and should have. They should have are those parts of the initial specification that may be thought desirable, but that can be relaxed. Where I am going to compromise is should have. That can be relaxed if required as the design develops. And that compromisable things again coming into the economic aspects. It depends on the difficulty, the cost, and the other parameters. Whenever possible, the designer should always question the design requirements. सही में ये मेरे को needed है क्या? Is it really must have or it is should have? Even when we go into the market, just simply shopping a certain shirt, I liked it. Is it needed really or just as I am having money I am going to purchase it? That is सही में need है या नहीं है वो सोचने का है. That should be questioned. Whenever possible, the designer should always question the design requirements. That is what is needed. सही में ये चाहिए क्या? Then the setting the design basic. The most important step in starting a process design is translating the customer need into the basic design. So this design basis is a more precise statement of a problem that is to be solved. It will normally include the production rate and purity specifications of the main product. In our the first subject of our chemical engineering, that is your material balance and energy balance, there we are going to take a certain basis for design, basis for solving the problems. It is similar to this basis. So कितने capacity का मेरे को production चाहिए, depending on that I have to produce. Production rate क्या चाहिए and कितने purity का product चाहिए. Because after a certain limit, the cost for purification increases exponentially. So, it is normally include the production rate and the purity specifications of the main product together with the information on constraints that will influence the design, such as the system of units to be used, the national, local or company design codes that must be followed, then the details of raw materials that are available. So कहाँ से मेरा raw material आ रहा है? That is also to be taken into consideration. Then information on the different potential sites, location, including the climate conditions, then infrastructure availability, then the price of the utilities, that is your fuel prices, steam presses, cooling water, processing air, then process water, electricity, all these are the cost considerations. So before establishing a plant, one should have the information related to all these different aspects. The design basis must be clearly defined before the design can be begun. And if the design is carried out for a client, then the design basis should be revised with the client at the start of the project. So ultimately कितने capacity का कितने rate का production चाहिए, that is going to be finalized in the second stage. The next is the generation of possible design concepts, that is the ways whether our chemical engineering projects that can be divided into three types depending on the novelty involved. That is, one is the modification and additions to certain existing plant, which is going to reduce the cost of production. It usually carried out by the plant design group itself. जो प्रोडक्शन के लोग हैं वो खुद ही इसमें प्लांट में मॉडिफिकेशंस और एडिशंस करके कॉस्ट कटिंग का काम करते हैं. Then there can be the new production capacity. I am going to install a new plant but with the same process, same way. So that is the new production capacity to meet the growing sales demand and the sale of established processes by contractors. Then repetition of the existing designs with only minor design changes, including designs of vendors and competitors, then processes carried out to understand whether they have compelled the cost of production. The next is the new process. New process डेवलप करने के लिए प्रोडक्ट सेम है और कैन बी a new product also. Then the new process that is developed from the laboratory research to the pilot plant and then to the commercial plant. So there are three stages. Laboratory research is there. Then once the laboratory data that is created, then we have to think for our pilot plants and then moving towards the commercial processes. So any development of a new process that starts with a laboratory, then with the pilot plant operations and then to the commercial processes. Whenever we call certain incubation centers and other things, they are related either with the laboratory research and the pilot plant scales. The commercial processes, they are the independent and one has to develop individually. Even here, most of the unit operations and process equipments will be established designs. Then generation of possible design concepts. What are the different possibilities that will be there? So majority of the process designs are based on designs that previously existed, and even if it's a new product that is developed, uses the type of the processes are often based on previous designs for similar products. तो जो कुछ पास्ट में हो चुका है उसके ही ऊपर न्यू प्रोडक्ट भी डेवलप हुआ है, तो जो डिजाइन कंसिडरेशंस होते हैं वो प्रीवियसली सिमिलर प्रोडक्ट्स में जहां पे भी यूज हुए हैं उसी के इसमें मॉडिफिकेशंस किए जाते हैं. in general case. With the overall completely new process designing, it's very difficult. Whether it will work or not, it's a questionable, and if you are going to do that, then one has to be completely thorough with the pilot plant data and with a small capacity production. Then and only then the companies, they can invest in that, or nobody is going to take the risk for the completely new design without consideration of the previous designs. So the majority of the process designs are based on designs that previously existed. That is first way. And if it's a new product, then the previous designs, they are to be considered. The next is the first step in devising the new process design will be to sketch out a block diagram. That is what we have studied, certain block diagrams. Our process calculation, first we are drawing the block diagrams and हर एक ब्लॉक में कितना इनपुट है, कितना आउटपुट है, क्या प्रोसेस हो रहा है, we are taking into consideration those accounts. So developing a block diagram, and once the block diagram that is developed, we are going to develop this sequence of unit operations, and that is nothing but your process flow sheet. So process flow sheet has to be developed. With the experience, which type of the unit operations and equipments, that is from similar products, previous designs from your similar products. That is, we are taking into consideration the certain unit operations and equipments, which is with this previous designs, previously existed design, or from previous designs for similar products. So that steps involved in determining the sequence of unit operations, and that constitutes a process flow sheet. So development of the process flow sheet is achieving the one stage. The generation of idea for possible solutions to design problem cannot be separated from the selection stage of a design process. Then the fitness testing, whether that data is suitable, that also has to be tested. Generally, design engineers, he builds a certain mathematical models or a certain pilot plant and then scale up to the commercial. So these design engineers must determine how will each design concept meets the identified need. It is usually inexpensive to build the several designs to find out which will work the best. For that purpose, the design engineer, he builds a mathematical model for that, or set up a certain pilot plant and collect the certain necessary data. The collection of this necessary data is very much essential, either by the pilot plant or by a mathematical model. And doing or investing in a mathematical model is less as compared to your pilot plant, but the development of perfect mathematical model, again it's a question. So people still rely on the pilot plant data. Then the design engineer must assemble all the information needed to model the process so as to predict its performance against the identified objectives. Then design organizations prepare this basic data. Then the most important aspect, that is the economic evaluation, optimization, and the selection of a certain process. Because there are a lot many processes for a single product. Say for example, polyethylene terephthalate. From polyethylene terephthalate, you are getting the polymers. There are different processes, different technologies, and out of that, one has to select one and develop his plant. So identification of few candidate designs that meet the customer objectives. Then the process design selection, selection of a process design. There are different uh, technologies. From those different technologies, I have to select a certain technology which will be suitable for my product. Then the economic design and its selection, then analysis of what will be the capital cost and what should be the operating cost. All these detailed analysis has to be done. The other factors like your safety, environmental, government rules and regulations, all these considerations are to be designed. And finally, the optimization has to be carried out for the proper economic evaluation. This topic itself is a separate topic that can be considered in case of our chemical equipment design. And generally the people who are from commerce or from management side in the finance, they go into the details, much details related to all these aspects. We study certain only few units in either of the subjects related to the economic evaluation. Then finally the detailed design and equipment selection. So the detailed specifications of the equipments that are coming at this stage. प्रोसेस सिलेक्ट हो गई, उसका इकोनॉमिक्स डिसाइड हो गया, उसके बाद में इक्विपमेंट सिलेक्शन आता है. So detailed specification of the equipments depending on the rate of production. So the dimensions of the equipment, detailed specifications when you talk, that will be the dimensions of those equipments. Say I want to produce the 200 tons per day of a certain product. So how much will be the volume for each equipment? What will be the dimensions of that equipment? That comes into these detailed specifications of the equipment. Then the interaction with the other engineering disciplines, that is your civil engineers for your site preparation, then mechanical engineers for fabrication of the equipments, electrical, instrumentation, electronics engineers for your electrical and instrumentation controls, that will be required. Now this subject of equipment selection or the equipment design. So from the chemical engineering design, we have reached to the point of design of equipment. So chemical engineering design or plant design, that is incorporating the various points, that is your design object, then setting the design basics, then generation of the possible design concept, then fitness testing, mathematical model, pilot plant data, economic evaluation and optimization, and then finally the detailed design and equipment selection. So here our subject of chemical equipment design that starts at this stage. When you think of a plant, it's a big size. Now, step by step, we are understanding the different points or different subjects in our syllabus so that we should be able to design the chemical plants or the process plants, material balance, energy balance, that helps to give you the basics of engineering. That is what the इतना अमाउंट मेरे को लगेगा इस रॉ मटेरियल का तो मेरा इतना प्रोडक्शन होगा. Based on that, after that you require the certain unit operations and unit processes. Pumps chahiye, then you require a reactor, then you require a distillation column, then you require an absorption column, certain furnaces are required. So all these are your different equipments. And to fabricate these equipments, one has to be a knowledge and cooperation with this mechanical engineers. And that is why this subject is more mechanical oriented also, where you require the understanding of the strength of material. So all these are your basic needs. You require a civil engineer, you require a mechanical engineering understanding, electrical, instrumentation, electronics and computer, and those who are better to understanding of all these aspects, he is going to rise to a higher position to a president level at a faster rate. तो मेरे को क्या जिंदगी में बनने का है, क्या समझने का है, क्या करने का है, तो मेरे को ये सारे चीजों का अंडरस्टैंडिंग डेवलप करना पड़ेगा. एंड दैट इज व्हाट इज नीडेड फॉर a better engineer. To have the better progress in his or her life, you have to go into the all different aspects. So this is the detailed design and equipment selection. Then there are many companies which are engaged in this designing aspects. That is the EPC, that is engineering, procurement and construction. Engineering, that is related to the designing. Procurement, you are going to procure all these equipments for which are needed. And then the construction in terms of civil, mechanical and electrical engineers, there also you will require the construction. So EPC is the complete solution you will get for the engineering, procurement and construction. The detailed design decisions tends to focus mainly on the equipment selection through rather than on changing the flow sheet. That is the generally engineering companies, they are not focused about changing the flow sheets. They are focused about the equipment. They are mainly focused related to the equipment and not changing the flow sheets. So now coming to the chemical manufacturing processes, any